Yai da 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 ya da 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 da. Yai da 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 ya da da da. Yai da ya da 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 da. Yai da 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 da. Yai da 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 da. Yai da 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 da. Yai da ya da 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 da. Yai da 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 da. Yai da 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 da. Yai da 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 ya da da. Yai da ya da da. Yai da 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 da. Yai da 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 da. Yai da 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 da. Yai da ya da da. Yai da 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 da. Yai da 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 da. Yai da da da. Yai da ya da da. Yai da da da. Yai da da da. Yai da da da. Yai da ya da da. Yai da da da. Yai ya da da. Yai ya da da. Yai da ya da da. Yai da da da. Yai da da da. Yai da da da. Yai da ya da da. Yai da da da. Yai da da da. Yai da da da. Yai da ya da da. Yai da da da. Yai da da da. Yai da da da. Yai da ya da da. Hello, everyone. I'm Alana, Wilderness Torah's Community Programs Manager, and I wanted to introduce myself and invite you all to the virtual village. In response to these uncertain times and the unfortunate cancellation of our annual Passover in the Desert Festival, we decided to use all of our energy to create the virtual village space. As a part of awakening the earth-based traditions of Judaism, Wilderness Torah creates village life during our immersive land-based festivals, such as Passover in the Desert, by uplifting and encouraging individual gifts of the collective community. 4 times a week in this virtual village space, you will learn with Wilderness Torah core community members who are sharing their gifts, as well as longtime stakeholders in the earth-based Jewish movement, such as Mike Cummins. Thank you for being here with us. We're so excited to have you a part of our village. Raise of hands, anyone who this is their first Wilderness Torah program. Woo! Thank you all for being here, and raise of hands for those of you that this is your first virtual village program. Amazing. We are committed to keeping Virtual Village accessible and free. If you would like to support Wilderness Torah in the effort, we welcome any and all donations, big or small, as we endeavor to provide Jewish wisdom and community building through this hard time. If you are new to Wilderness Torah or would like to find out more about what we do and how to get involved, my peer Malka will put the link to our website and donation page in our chat now. These sessions are being recorded and live streamed to Facebook. And so all of our past sessions are up on our website. And so if you're curious to see what else we have had in store, feel free to check out what's there. And without further ado, I'm super excited to welcome Mike Cummins. Mike directs the Torah Trek Center for Jewish Wilderness Spirituality. He's the author of Making Prayer Real, Leading Jewish Spiritual Voices on Why Prayer is Difficult and What to Do About It, and A Wild Faith, Jewish Ways into Wilderness, Wilderness Ways into Judaism, Jewish Lights Publishing, a yeshiva-trained Israeli-ordained Reform rabbi, and a licensed Israeli desert guide. He holds an MA in Jewish education with an emphasis in contemporary philosophy. He brings the fruits of a spiritual journey that include extensive training and meditation, Hebrew chant, Qigong, and spiritual practice in the natural world. And we are so excited to have you and to learn with you today.
Yeah, I'm there. Okay. Hey, thanks, Alana. So great to be with Wilderness Torah again. It's been a while, so I'm really happy to see the faces I'm looking at, and happy to share some time doing some Torah together. We have a link up in the chat room for you to download our source sheet if you'd like to look at it, print it out. Otherwise, we'll be putting it up on the screen as we go along. So today we're going to take a look at the thought of Abraham Joshua Heschel. That's not a name that any of you have not heard of before, I'm quite sure. But just to give a brief biography of the man, he was born in Poland and raised between the two world wars. Before World War II, he did his university education in Germany, and he just managed to get out. He was part of a program sponsored by Hebrew Union College, the Reform Movement's rabbinical seminary, to get scholars out of Europe. He spent the war years in Cincinnati teaching at Hebrew Union College, but then moved to the natural place for him, which was the conservative movement's seminary, the Jewish Theological Seminary. He burst upon the scene in the 1950s, writing in English, his fifth or so language, and yet his writing is considered some of the finest prose that you're ever going to see a Jewish writer write in America. In my opinion, he's the greatest thinker ever to write on American soil. So he's very famous for a book called The Sabbath, which you may have seen. This little book was a bestseller. It was loved by Christians as well as Jews. But he mostly became famous in theological circles for writing this book, Man Is Not Alone, in which he gives his general philosophy of religion. And it was shortly in the 50s, followed up in 1955 with this book, God in Search of Man. We'll be studying from this today. And then he burst upon the American scene in the 1960s. He was one of the early supporters of the civil rights movement. He marched into Selma with Martin Luther King. Had Dr. King lived a few months more, he would have celebrated with Heschel at Heschel's table, the Passover Seder. And he was one of the early opponents to the Vietnam War. So he was controversial, and but by the time he died in I think it was 1974, he was more or less the most famous Jewish theologian in America. So we're going to take a look at two chapters of this book, God in Search of Man. God in Search of Man is a big book. It does everything that a philosophy or a theology, a big book on the theology of Judaism is supposed to do. It covers revelation, it covers theodicy, why do bad things happen to good people, it covers do we have to do the mitzvot, the halacha, it covers what do we think about God. But what's interesting is that Heschel starts in the first of three sections, which is on God, by describing what he says is the universal situation of which all religions come out of. And in that opening section, chapter 4 is on wonder, and chapter 7 is on awe. And that's what we're going to take a look at right now. So I'm going to ask for some help with a little reading from our hosts. Ilana, if you could read number 1 for us, please.
Wonder or radical amazement is the chief characteristic of the religious man's attitude towards history and nature.
Let me stop you right off. Sorry, I wrote this down to say this before. He wrote in the 1950s. He uses sexist language, and we have to be forgiving about that. He raised a daughter, Susanna Heschel, who was one of the pioneering Jewish feminists of our time. So let's not hold it against him. Please continue.
One attitude is alien to his spirit, taking things for granted, regarding events as natural course of things. To find an approximate cause of a phenomenon is no answer to his ultimate wonder. He knows that there are laws that regulate the course of natural processes. He is aware of the regularity and pattern of things. However, such knowledge fails to mitigate his sense of perpetual surprise at the fact that there are facts at all. Looking at the world, he would say, "This is the Lord's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes." Psalm 118:23.
All right, and let's go down to number 6. And Ilana, if you could read that as well before I comment on them.
The grandeur or mystery of being is not a particular puzzle to the mind, as for example, the cause of volcanic eruptions. We do not have to go to the end of reasoning to encounter it. Grandeur or mystery is something with which we are confronted everywhere and at all times. Does not mystery reign within reasoning, within perception, within explanation?
I'm getting a little, I think I was frozen up for a little bit. Is everybody hearing? Yes? Okay, great. So here we see some of the first basic distinction that Heschel's going to make, which is the difference between an attitude of wonder and an attitude in other places in the book he calls of curiosity. It's relevant, for instance, here volcanic eruptions, and then we, have our answer and we go on to the way we tend to look at things before we start to break them down into sorry, I just got to get into the chat 1 second to make sure that you're hearing me. So the idea is that help us to understand the phenomena that we're looking at. So let's see what he does with that as he goes on. Let's go to number 4. Ilana, would you like to read?
Radical amazement has a wider scope than any other act of man. While any act of perception or cognition has as its object a selected segment of reality, radical amazement refers to all of reality, not only to what we see, but also to the very act of seeing, as well as to our own selves, to the selves that see and are amazed at their ability to see.
All right, so this is an insight that Heschel returns to over and over again. His technical term, or his philosophic term for wonder, is radical amazement. And what characterizes radical amazement is what we want to look at here. And he starts out in this quote by talking about how we look at all of reality when we're in a state of wonder. What the scientist does, what the philosopher does, is break things down into parts in order to figure out, what makes them work. And that's scientific method. It's also philosophic method. And Heschel's all for that. But his problem is that when we jump to that, then secular and scientific worldviews cut out what he thinks is the basis of them and the most important perspective we have, the whole perspective, which will also include wonder or radical amazement. So if we can have number 3 read, please.
Awareness of the divine begins with wonder. It is the result of what man does with his higher incomprehension. The greatest hindrance to such awareness is our adjustment to conventional notions, to mention cliches. Wonder or radical amazement, the state of maladjustment to words and notions, is therefore a prerequisite for an authentic awareness of that which is.
All right. So here I'm going to leave this up for another couple seconds because it's a lot to take in. The key word here is higher incomprehension. Heschel remember he's in the 50s, right? Where the cultural icon of the day is the scientist in a white coat with a pen in his pocket, right? He is saying what today we all basically accept, but at his time it was really swimming against the stream, swimming upstream, which is to say that we're not going to get everything we need from science. And then we have to understand there are certain things we're not going to know. So long before, Buddhism was popular in the United States and we were hearing terms about like not knowing and mindfulness, he is saying to us that we have to start with the fact that there's mystery, that we don't know everything. And if we get set in our ways, if we begin to look at the world the way we always do, the way people tell us to look at it, or the way that we're used to looking at it, then we're never going to see with eyes of wonder, as one book about him has been called. So this is such a radical statement for Heschel to make, a state of maladjustment to words and notions. Heschel is a living, walking encyclopedia of Jewish text and Jewish knowledge. In fact, this is the last book he wrote, Heavenly Torah, right? Look how big it is. There's like 10 Jewish sources on every page. He wrote this towards the end of his life, and he wrote it, the first draft, most of it, from memory, right? He was a prodigy. He knew Hasidic literature inside and out. He knew the Zohar. He, of course, knew Talmud, Tanakh, rabbinic literature, Midrash, right? And yet he is telling you we need to be in a state of maladjustment to words. That's as radical a statement as a rabbi like Heschel is going to make. Everything he has is from, his position in life is because he's a master of those books. And yet he's saying that if you go through life listening to these books or any other book and take it as that's it, and don't have your own sense of being able to see the world from a fresh place every day, then you're not going to get what those books are all about. So he's asking us to be in a state of wonder, a state of maladjustment to everyday reality. All right, so we're going to do one more quote, and then I'm going to ask for your comments in the chat section. Can we ask for one, Ilana or Malka, to read number 2?
Zali, go ahead.
All right. As civilization advances, the sense of wonder declines. Such decline is an alarming symptom of our state of mind. Humankind will not perish for want of information, but only for want of appreciation. The being of our happiness lies in the understanding that life without wonder is not worth living. What we lack is not a will to believe, but a will to wonder.
All right, so this is classic Heschel, right? One of his students, Michael Berenbaum in Los Angeles, who studied with him at JTS and getting his rabbinic education, said that Heschel used to actually come up with one-line zingers, right? Sentences that he would write down and put in an envelope, and then he would use them later on when he was writing. And if that's true, there's like 2 of them in this quote, right? Humankind will not perish for want of information, but only for want of appreciation. So that's reinforcing the points we've already talked about so far. And then we get to the end. What we lack is not a will to believe, but a will to wonder. Not a will to believe, but a will to wonder. Okay, so Heschel did not just make up that phrase, a will to believe. That phrase comes from this book, from an essay by William James. William James was the leading American academic in the late 1800s. He was at Harvard. He is the father of comparative religion, one of the fathers of psychology, one of the 3 fathers of the only original American philosophic school, pragmatism. He is a leading guy, right? One of the top, 2 or 3 intellectuals in the United States. He's also a believing Christian. And so other Christians look to him to say, how can you, be a man of science and at the same time be a believing Christian and believe the dogmas of Christianity? And so he wrote this essay in response to defend his own faith and his own belief. And unfortunately, he kind of titled it badly. The will to believe kind of gives you the idea that you have to take things that are really unbelievable and and forget about what you don't like about them and just have the will to believe something that doesn't really make sense to you. That's not actually what he said in the essay. In the essay, he writes, when criticism came in after he published it, he immediately said, I mistitled this. It should be the right to believe, or I think the essay should be called something like the choice to believe. But taking him at face value, there is a long Christian tradition, starting with Kierkegaard, in modern times, that the best way to deal with the conflicts with science is to make a leap of faith, in Kierkegaard's words, to make a leap of faith across the abyss of the absurd. In other words, if you hold as a matter of faith, as you hold up as something that's true, that seems counterintuitive or doesn't seem to jive with science, but you believe it anyway, then you get merit in heaven, you get merit in God's world. This is a good thing. And this belief is alive and well today. I mean, I used to, at one point in my life, I used to watch televangelists on Sunday mornings out of professional interest. And I can tell you that they would make this point. I also heard it in a Starbucks when two Bible studying Christians sat down next to me. And of course, I dropped on their conversation, and they brought this point up as well. If you think about it, explains a lot of what's going on in the United States today, that there is this long tradition of faith means that we hold things in opposition to what science tells us, or at least things without evidence, or things that are counterintuitive to what we would think is true. And the essay itself is a beautiful essay. It's probably the first postmodern theological essay, because it was written in the 1890s. I mean, the points in it are really only brought up and accepted in the 1970s. So he's way ahead of his time. And he's really a brilliant guy. And I have to say, he has a lot in common theologically with Heschel. But Heschel wants nothing to do with this will to believe stuff. He says what we lack is not a will to believe, but a will to wonder. Heschel doesn't want us making any leaps, and he doesn't see any conflict with science. In fact, for Heschel, the more you know, the more you should feel wonder. Because if you look at it correctly, if you look at it, the fact that without arrogance, everything that science tells us about existence just adds on, tells us more about what a mysterious and amazing and wonderful thing it is that we're just even alive. And how did this come to be? And so Heschel says that's what brings him. That's why he said up above in number 3, I'm going to share this again. My Zoom skills are on the uptick, but not quite there. If you look at number 3, he starts out that sentence with awareness of the divine begins with wonder. All right. So far we've had a good dose of Heschel quotes on this idea of radical amazement. Let me ask our hosts if there's any comments in the chat that you think that you'd like to raise right now. If anybody would like to write any comments on either questions or your thoughts about Heschel's take on wonder, please share it with us in the chat room.
I'm not seeing anything right now. I would say feel free to go forward. Just lots of sweet comments about how great this is so far.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, and I've seen some names up there of people. I'm going to take a look at the gallery just a second to look at all your faces. Yeah.
Someone
it's really
said,
cool.
Einstein said, the more you know, the more you don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Cool. All right, we're going to go back and continue on. Heschel, go ahead and write anything you'd like to write in the comments, questions or comments. They are welcome. All right, Ilana, if you could share with us number 5.
To the prophets, wonder is a form of thinking. It is an attitude that never ceases.
All right. So think about that. Now, why the prophets? Heschel wrote his doctorate back in Germany on the prophets, so he was very connected to them. And this line just really blew me away when I read it. My own personal biography, my own personal biography, is that I was, just finished rabbinical school, and right at that time I was having my biggest crisis of faith ever. I can't say I had a whole lot of faith ever to begin with, but as I was becoming a rabbi, I really felt like that I was wondering if I should allow myself to be ordained, if I really wanted to represent Torah. And thank God at that time I rediscovered wilderness. I had grown up backpacking in the Sierra Nevada. Wilderness. People used to joke about my family that we spent more time in Yosemite than we did at home. So I discovered the Judean desert, and that changed everything. I became an Israeli desert guide and dumped my plans to do a PhD in Jewish thought. And ever since, I've been on kind of a mission or a life's project to try to figure out why it is I feel in nature what I wanted to feel in so many other places and in reading so many books, but never got there. So Heschel's has really been huge for me. And so I had just been, I've been walking the desert for a couple of years as part of Israeli Desert Guide School and doing my first leading of outdoor spiritual trips, which took place in Israel. And I came across this line that to the prophets, wonder is a form of thinking. So why did that blow me away? Usually when you think about wonder, you think of that drive through the Wawona Tunnel and you come out of the other side and there's Yosemite Valley in front of you and Bridal Veil Fall on the right and El Capitan to the left and Half Dome in the middle. And you can't talk, right? You're just speechless. If you say anything, it's not anything I could repeat on a webinar like this. And you're standing in Heschel's radical amazement. So to me, wonder was always something that happened to me. I did something, I went somewhere, I looked up, I looked to the right, I looked to the left, whatever, and wonder in a given moment, wonder happened. So how can you say wonder is a form of thinking? Well, that reminded me of part of my graduate studies in moral theory and education. The way virtue theory works is that we educate ourselves in the virtues by basically what we do on Yom Kippur, right? I'll give you an example from the literature. I'm walking down the street, the secular literature. I'm walking down the street and there's an elderly person who could use help getting across the street, but I'm late for a meeting. I don't give it a second thought. I just walk right through and go to my meeting. And that night, as I go to bed, it comes back to me and I think to myself, that was really wrong. What kind of person am I that I did not help that person when they needed it, that I didn't notice them? And since this is a teaching story, the very same thing happens the next day, right? And I see an elderly person who needs help across the street. And this time I say, this time I'm going to do the right thing. And I lend that person some help. And then the next day it happens again. And this time I don't even have to think about it, right? I just do the right thing. So that's how our cognitive thought process can lead to really our intuition being changed. And that in Judaism, by the way, is the definition of a tzaddik, right? To do tshuva, according to Maimonides, to do, repentance, the bad English translation, to come back to God is to be put in the same place where before you acted improperly, and this time to act the right way. That's the test that tells you that you have done tshuva when you act the right way. And a tzaddik is a person who doesn't have to think about it anymore, right? It's so inculcated in that person. So when Heschel says that wonder is a form of thinking, that's what popped into my head. If he's writing this to teach me that I should consider wonder the way I would consider, compassion or honesty or one of the other virtues. And then he writes at the end of that sentence, it is an attitude that never ceases. And so as I mentioned before, the phrase was coined by reading Heschel, by Larry Kushner, that I could see the world every day with eyes of wonder. That's a choice. That's something we can educate ourselves to do. And I think that if we all think about that, I think we'd all have to agree that that's correct. We know that there are people who go around the world and see the world from a divine perspective, from a perspective of how wonderful it is, from a perspective of joy. And there are people who do just the opposite. And over time, people actually change their perspectives because of their life experience. Sometimes, usually not intentional, but sometimes it's very intentional, like with what we do on Yom Kippur. So that leads us to the next thing I'd like to share with you from God in Search of Man. Ilana, if you could read number 7.
Every evening we recite, He creates light and makes the dark. Twice a day we say, He is one. What is the meaning of such repetition? A scientific theory, once it is announced and accepted, does not have to be repeated twice a day. The insights of wonder must be constantly kept alive. Since there is a need for daily wonder, there is a need for daily worship.
So Heschel directly relates this to the Jewish spiritual practice of prayer. And the He is one is a direct quote from the Shema, and He creates light and makes the dark is, God creates light and makes the dark is a quote from the prayer preceding the Shema, the Yotzer Or. So, as a wilderness guy, I always struggled with the fact that I'm out in Joshua Tree National Park and I've got a prayer book in my hand. Should I be reading a psalm that tells me how fantastic nature is, or should I just put the book down and look? Right? So it's a pretty clear choice when you're in Joshua Tree National Park. But we don't live our lives in national parks. And what do we do when we're back in the city? What's beautiful about this is that Heschel basically says that Judaism as a spiritual practice, much of it is about training ourselves to make wonder an attitude that we see the world with on a daily basis. All right, I'm looking at the time. We're going to do breakout rooms and get a chance to talk in a bit, but I'm thinking that maybe the best thing to do is to push ahead and cover awe in the next 10 minutes, and then that'll give us a little time for breakout rooms, and you can have all of Heschel to discuss instead of part of him. So I'm gonna move now to the subject of awe. All right, chapter 7, God in Search of Man. So let's start out by noticing that awe is a composite term, right? And I'd like you to contribute by way of the chat now. When you ask around and people think about it, most people agree that childbirth is probably the most awesome moment that people have in life. Both the mother as well as the partner, as well as the attending staff. The new life is a truly awesome experience. So I'd like to ask you, what, especially those of you who've experienced it, what were you feeling in that moment of awe? What goes into a moment that we would call awesome? And I'm not talking about a good run down a ski slope on your snowboard, right? Although that's not bad, but what is your what are you feeling? What is part of an awesome moment? So get in there on the chat. All right, feels like a miracle. Yes, the feeling of miraculousness. No words. Yes, heart swells, tears of joy. So it's a place of that amazement, right? When there are no words, that's a place where you're stunned and it's amazing, right? It's not something that fits into your normal conceptions. All right, what else are we seeing here? A visceral reaction in your body, right? You feel it. It's physical. It's not just a concept. You can't believe it. Thank you, Philip. Happy fuzzy, all right? That's good. Life-changing in an instant. Thanks, yes. You're in the moment, right? Supreme mindfulness. So when life changes in an instant, you're realizing, right, that you're in a moment that you can't think about it very much, right? There's no words, but your life will never be the same, right? You know that you're not going to be the same after this moment that you were before. Anything else beyond comprehension? Radical energy. Oh, and here we go. Thank you, Sophie. Birth feels like death. That's one of the things that characterizes awe, especially in a situation like childbirth and out in wilderness, right? Most of the time, before civilization got so advanced, most of human history, we were not able to separate, life and death so easily. But you go out in wilderness, right? And if you see something growing, you see something decaying. If you see an animal, the next moment you'll see a carcass, right? You do not get the luxury of feeling that maybe I could just put all the threats to me and all the difficult things of life away like we can in the sanitized supermarket. What else do we have? Enlightenment. Okay, I'm going to add another thing in here. Awesome situations usually are dangerous. They're liminal situations where, something could go wrong. Just as life is a new life shows us the border between nothingness and something out of nothing, a new life, how amazing that is, so is the loss of life. So Heschel notes a little further down in the chapter, it's on this sheet, but I'll explain it to you this way. The Hebrew word for awe is yirah, right? I don't think there's any etymological connection to the English word awe, but they sound alike. The word in Hebrew is yirah, right? Now it has two meanings. It means fear. That's the common usage. And then when it's used in relation to God, it means what we think of as awe. So Heschel asks, what's the difference? What's the difference between yirah as awe and yirah as fear? All right, so think of yourself out on a trail somewhere and suddenly a lightning storm descends upon you. What is the smartest thing you can do? Rhetorical question, right? You should get yourself to a safe place, right? If you can jump into a car, that's the best safe place. If you can jump into a building, that works. If that doesn't work, then you gotta, know your lightning safety in wilderness, right? You gotta get away from natural things that conduct electricity. You don't want to be by the biggest tree. You want to get in small, lower trees that are evenly apart, all those things to make yourself safe. But what you should be doing is running away from the danger. What happens though, if you can see the lightning safely? What do we want to do if we're in such a viewpoint? We actually want to get closer. We want to see it. We don't want to miss it. We want that experience more than anything, as a matter of fact. And so Heschel says the difference is that fear repels, awe attracts. So what do we have in awesome moments? We have liminality, we have beauty, danger, grandeur, life, death, danger, all it's an intense moment of all the really important things in life. So we may not know, I like to put it this way. I'm always interested, at some point or another, I'm going to ask the question, what's the meaning of a life? And I know that if I really want to get a handle on that, one thing I want to do is try to bring my experience of awesome moments to that question. And if I can, I want to go and pursue more awesome moments to get more insight into what a life really means and what a life is all about. So with those points in mind, let's go finish up with our source sheet here with Dr. Heschel. And I would like you to read number 9, if you will.
Awe is a way of being in rapport with the mystery of all reality. The awe that we sense or ought to sense when standing in the presence of a human being is a moment of intuition for the likeness of God, which is concealed in his essence. Not only man, every inanimate thing stand in a relation to the Creator. The secret of every being is the divine care and concern that are invested in it. Something sacred is at stake in every event.
And if you could continue on with number 11, please.
The meaning of awe is to realize that life takes place under wide horizons, horizons that range beyond the span of an individual life or even the life of a nation, a generation, or an era. Awe enables us to perceive in the world intimations of the divine, to sense in small things the beginning of infinite significance, to sense the ultimate in the common and the simple, to feel in the rush of the passing the stillness of the eternal.
I'm just going to let us dwell on that a second. That's a lot to take in. All right. So Heschel has, in his inimitable prose that no one else writes like he wrote, that I'm aware of in the Jewish theological world, right? He gives us quite, you know, quite some insight into why awe is important. Through awe, we see what he wants, what he hopes that we're going to see as spiritual beings, as spiritual Jews. So I'm going to leave it there. We're going to talk a little bit more at the end, but I'm going to ask now that we go into breakout rooms. And my question to you is, what's your reaction to all this stuff? So here's your chance to probably meet someone that you haven't met before in the Wilderness Torah community. So that's part of our purpose as well. But I'd like you just to react. You know, is Heschel, think about your experience out in wilderness. Think about your experience in life. Is Heschel telling you something that's true? Do you agree with it? Disagree with it? That's the great thing about an existential writer like him or Martin Buber. We don't have to go somewhere and try to do research in a library to figure out whether they're right. We just have to think about our lives and say, is he telling it like it is, or is he not? So let's go into breakout rooms and share our thoughts on that with one of the other members of the community. All right. So, any way to know if everybody's back?
We've got 5 participants so far and growing.
Okay, so we'll wait for everybody to come back.
Looks like we got critical mass.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just looking at the faces again, and especially those of you who I've known for over the years. I'm really enjoying looking at the faces. All right. I'll get out of gallery view here. All right. So we're going to conclude by looking at the last quote on the sheet, which is the one that you read in the little blurb advertising this session. And this is how Heschel ends. I'm going to try to get this to the top more. How he, I think if he doesn't end the chapter this way, it's close to the end. And it's number 13 there. Would you like to read it, Ilana?
Awe precedes faith. It is at the root of faith. We must grow in awe in order to reach faith. We must be guided by awe to be worthy of faith. Awe rather than faith is the cardinal attitude of the religious Jew.
All right, look at that for a little bit. This to me is the most important quote that almost never gets quoted. This to me is the most radical thing and the most beautiful thing. Heschel, of course, is not against faith at all. You know, he's one of the biggest proponents of it. He spends much of the rest of the book, devotes whole chapters to what faith is, right? So all the more, it makes it this important, especially in a Christian society, when he says that awe precedes faith, awe is at the root of faith. We must be guided by awe to be worthy of faith. And awe is what needs to be central, not faith. I mean, it's mind-blowing. So what's he saying with that? And why do I think it's so important? Again, Heschel is the man who knows Jewish literature, rabbinic, Bible, religious, rabbinic sources, Hasidic thought. He knows them, his encyclopedic knowledge of Jewish words and Jewish books. He certainly has beliefs. He thinks, and he thinks you should have them, right, as a good religious Jew. And he spends the rest of his book explaining to you why you should have them. But he doesn't want you to believe anything because you learned it in a book or because he told it to you or anybody else, because he thinks that if the way you get to Judaism's response to being alive, to Jewish to the Jewish way of life and the beliefs that go with that way of life, if you get to that because you accept it on blind faith, you won't even understand it. You won't understand why it's there. And you want to be able to do it with the intention that you can bring to it. He wants you to experience what the people who created Judaism experienced. He wants you to be able to feel it. And so he's teaching you about wonder and awe so that you go out and have more of it, and then you will hopefully use it to do more than just have a nice time out in nature or an unexamined, look at the key events in your life. Rather, you'll realize that it's in these moments, these awesome moments, that the key to real meaning in life can be found. They can direct us and move us forward. And if we have them in our experience, then Judaism makes a lot of sense. Then we understand that this is a wise response to living. So that's his approach. And that's why this line is so important. And I'm going to close with this before we have some chance for closing comments by anybody who'd like to make one. Childbirth obviously is this amazing, awesome event, not a very frequent event. and awesome events can happen anywhere at any time, really. But where is the most reliable and most available place that you can feel awe? All of us know I'm talking about wilderness, right? Getting out in the natural world is the place where we can feel the maladjustment to words, where we can take out our prayer book and put it down and look at what's out there and then come back to our prayer book and understand it in a whole different way. So the dialogue with wilderness is because awe is so critical. What I always tell my fellow Jewish educators in the mainstream Jewish world at conferences and so on, and my fellow rabbis, is the greatest classroom in the world to teach prayer and God awaits us all, but we have to learn how to think outside the building. A lot of Jewish educators are pretty good at thinking outside the box, but we need to think outside the building. So I think Ilana asked me when we were talking before the session, so how do you know Zelig? How did you know Wilderness Torah? I really was having trouble remembering how we first got together. But I knew, but what I told her was there was no way we were not going to get together. The closest organization to what I was doing at Torah Trek is Wilderness Torah, and we're brothers and sisters. And of course we're going to be together. There was no keeping us apart. So my blessing to this organization, everything that it's doing, it's one of the things, I can't tell you what it feels like as an older Jewish person to go to Passover in the desert, which I've done, 4 times, and to see, so many people under 40 who are growing with the tradition and shaping it and letting it shape them. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ilana and Malka. If you see any comments that you'd like to share, or if you'd like to unmute someone to make a comment, now's the time to do it for the amount of time that's available. If anybody'd like to unmute, and if anybody'd like to raise their hand either physically or through the chat box, go ahead and do that, and we'll unmute anybody who'd like to make a comment at this time.
I'm seeing a couple questions from much earlier in the session. Does Herschel source Reb Nachman? Is there a theological connection between the two of them? And then another question, did Heschel connect amazement to anything we would consider the child's mind?
Yeah, okay, so the first question, he was not a particular Reb Nachman fan, although he liked him, as far as I know. He was particularly moved by the Kotzker Rebbe and his own uncle, his own great-great-grandfather, Abraham Joshua Heschel of Apt, were his biggest Hasidic influences. Child's mind, yeah. When we talked earlier about that quote of maladjustment to words, I think the way that we're used to hearing that is child's mind or not knowing and being comfortable with that. He wants us to be, when he says maladjustment to words, he means not just, what you might read in the Tanakh, in the Bible. He's saying to concepts in general, to things that words convey. Our experience in life has to be bigger than our own thoughts. And so we have to be free enough of our thoughts to experience the world. And I think the child's mind is pretty much that. I see Rachel Chodron. Would you want to unmute her, Ilana or Malka?
Hi, thank you so much. I was just looking you up a little bit and seeing that you talk about making prayer real. And I was wondering if you could, along that line, give us what would be one practice that we could take with us going forward to be practicing this, living in awe and living in wonder in a Jewish way?
Well, I'll say 2 things. One is, I think walking meditation is not particularly Jewish because it's wordless, but to actually do what Heschel's talking about, we have to do things without words. So the fact that it doesn't specifically have a Jewish title to it doesn't mean it's not Jewish. And I'm not talking about Vipassana walking meditation in which you walk out in nature, but you focus on yourself. I'm talking about I-thou walking meditation where you focus on the trees, the birds, and so on. And both in my book and on my website, you'll see a video If you go to, well, I'll explain that in a second. Then the second question you asked was, I'm sorry, same question. The Jewish practice, I think, that does it is blessings. Most blessings in Judaism are not meant to be said before you do something because you know them by rote. Like, you know you're going to light the candle, so you say the blessing. You know you're going to drink Kiddush wine, so you say the blessing. Rather, you go through life and things happen, you say blessings. So we have a blessing for a beautiful tree, a beautiful plant, a plant that smells nice, a big mountain, when we see the ocean, when we hear lightning, when we see a rainbow. So the Jewish practice of putting all those blessings in your data bank, so that when you go through life, you respond with a blessing. That's a great, easy mindfulness practice. And of course, in the Talmud, it says you should say 100 blessings a day, meaning, no one thought that you only took blessings from the tradition, right? Say your own blessing is just as valid as anything else. So again, so let me just tell you that if I'm going to put it in the chat. If you go to RabbiMikeCummins.com and then go to the Torah Trek e-journal, we have a whole series of videos on Jewish practices in nature. So these two practices are there and many others, and I'm going to put that in the chat so you can go ahead and take a look. And of course, my book, A Wild Faith, has got about 50 practices, so I'm gonna give a shout out to that. So I'm gonna put that stuff in the chat while I think my time is done. So I'll turn it back over to Ilana.
Hi, friends. I'm just going to do a little closing here with everybody. My name is Malka. I am Wilderness Tour's Community Programs and Logistics Manager, and just want to say a big thank you to everyone for being here in virtual community with us today. All of our sessions are being recorded unless we otherwise note it, and they'll be posted on our website within a week after we stream these sessions. We have some really amazing sessions coming up next week. Sacred Space Making with Ariella Powers, Sacred Jewish Music for Resilience and Soothing Uncertainty with Yuval Ron, incredible Sephardi musician, and Organic Torah, the Torah of Nature and the Nature of Torah with Rabbi Natan. Stay tuned for our newsletter. It comes out every week stating more details about our upcoming programming. As well, you can always check out our Facebook or Instagram for more updates. My peer Alana will insert a link in for our website as well as our donation page if you feel called to support our work deeper. And a big thank you, of course, to Rabbi Mike. Incredible to learn with you and to be here with you. As always, we wish we had more time to all dig further into these incredible topics, and we're so grateful to be here in awe with you. And with that, I'll pass it back to Mike for any closing words, and we will all say goodbye and be on our way. Thank you so much.
Please God, Rucha Atya, Ruach HaOlam, may we experience this prison of social isolation as a challenge that imprints upon us what we already know. And let's get out and walk in wilderness. Ken Yiratzon.
Ken Yiratzon.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much.
Amen, amen, amen.
Take care.
Miss you, Rabbi.
She's
Shabbat
Thank
shalom,
you
y'all.
all. Blessings. I'm going to close the Zoom box now. Hope to see you soon at some of our next sessions. Thank you so much, Mike.
Everyone, you
Bye,
can
everyone.
save the chat. If you want to save the chat, you can go over and it downloads to your machine.
Thanks to all. Bye-bye.